In 1965, grandmothers made homemade candies when a box from the store cost more than a week of groceries. She was skilled. She knew how to turn sugar and patience into gifts no one forgot. Nobody believed her until they saw the empty pot and the wrapped candies. She had recipes her mother whispered, and others she perfected when guests were expected. Then people called them old-fashioned, and the recipes disappeared from every kitchen. Today we're rediscovering all 30 secret candies that grandmothers poured their hearts into. Number 8 took her 2 full days. Let me show you what saved. Divinity was the essential candy on holiday tables every year. No celebration felt complete without it. Grandmother started making it first during the week before family gatherings. 2 fresh egg whites went into her heavy glass mixing bowl. She beat them with a wire whisk until her wrist ached. Stiff peaks formed that didn't fall when she lifted the whisk. Sugar, corn syrup, and water boiled together on the stove. She watched the thermometer climb slowly. At hard ball stage, she tested it by dropping syrup into cold water. When the ball held firm, she knew it was ready. The hot syrup poured slowly into the beaten whites while she whisked without stopping. 1 full hour of beating until the mixture turned glossy white and held shape. Chopped pecans folded in last. Spoonfuls dropped onto wax paper set overnight. The kitchen smelled like sugar and patience. By morning, the candies sat fluffy and white on grandmother's best china plate. They vanished within hours when everyone gathered around the table. Nobody makes divinity anymore because nobody wants to beat egg whites by hand for an hour. The candy disappeared with the women who had the time and the strong wrists to make it right. Peanut brittle was the candy grandmother made on the coldest nights when the marble slab stayed cold, without effort. She heated sugar, corn syrup, and water in her heavy copper pot until the mixture turned amber and smelled like caramel. Raw peanuts went in next. She stirred constantly while the nuts toasted and the candy darkened. The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasting peanuts and burning sugar. At the hard crack stage, she tested it by dropping a thread into ice water. When it snapped clean, she knew it was done. Butter and baking soda went in last. The mixture foamed up fast. She poured it immediately onto the buttered marble slab before it hardened in the pot. The candy spread thin and crackled as it cooled. Grandmother worked fast with a metal spatula to stretch it thinner before it set completely. When it cooled, she broke it into jagged pieces with her hands. The candy snapped loud and sharp. Every piece was different, some thick with peanuts, some thin as glass. She stored it in a tin lined with wax paper. It lasted weeks if she hid it well. Most times it didn't make it past the first gathering. Chocolate fudge was the candy every child waited for because grandmother let them lick the spoon when she finished. She melted butter in a heavy saucepan and added sugar, cocoa powder, and milk. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred to keep it from scorching. At the soft ball stage, she tested it by dropping a bit into cold water. When it formed a soft ball that flattened between her fingers, she removed it from heat. Vanilla extract went in last. Then came the hardest part. She beat the fudge with a wooden spoon until it lost its shine and thickened. Her arm moved in circles for 15 minutes without stopping. The fudge turned from glossy to matte. When it held its shape, she knew it was ready. She poured it into a buttered pan and smoothed the top with the back of the spoon. It set in the pantry overnight. By morning it cut into perfect squares. The fudge was creamy and rich and melted on the tongue. Grandmother made 3 batches every holiday season because 1 batch never lasted. The children ate it warm from the pan when she wasn't looking. By the time guests arrived, the plate stayed empty, and she made more. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Panucci was the forgotten fudge that tasted like caramel and memories nobody talked about anymore. Grandmother made it with brown sugar instead of white. Butter, milk, and packed brown sugar heated together in her oldest pot. The mixture bubbled thick and smelled like molasses and burnt sugar. She stirred constantly to keep it from sticking to the bottom. At the soft ball stage, she tested it the old way by dropping syrup into cold water. When the ball held soft between her fingers, she pulled the pot from heat. A little vanilla went in. Then she beat it with a wooden spoon until her shoulders ached and the fudge turned pale and grainy. The transformation happened slowly. Glossy became matte. Then became thick. When it held peaks, she poured it into a buttered pan. Chopped pecans pressed into the top while the fudge was still warm. It set overnight in the cold pantry. By morning it cut into squares that crumbled slightly at the edges. The flavor was deeper than chocolate fudge. Richer. More complex. It tasted like brown sugar and butter and something grandmother never named, but everyone remembered. The recipe left with her. Pralines were the Southern candy grandmother learned from her mother, who learned from hers. Brown sugar, heavy cream, and butter melted together in a copper pot. She stirred until the sugar dissolved completely. Pecans went in whole. The mixture cooked slowly while she stirred and watched the color deepen from tan to amber. At the soft ball stage, she tested it by dropping candy into cold water. When it formed a soft ball, she removed the pot from heat. She beat the mixture with a wooden spoon until it started to thicken and lose its gloss. This part required perfect timing. Too early, and the pralines stayed runny. Too late, and they hardened in the pot. When the mixture turned creamy and held shape, she worked fast. Spoonfuls dropped onto wax paper in rough circles. The pralines cooled into flat discs studded with pecans. The tops crackled slightly. The bottoms stayed smooth. Each one was different. Some thick, some thin, some with more pecans than others. They tasted like butter and brown sugar in the South. Grandmother wrapped them individually in wax paper and stored them in a tin. They lasted days if hidden. Most times they disappeared within hours of cooling. If you remember these 5 candies, your generation probably knows the ones coming next. Divinity beaten by hand. Peanut brittle poured onto cold marble. Chocolate fudge stirred until arms ached. Penuche made with brown sugar. Pralines dropped onto wax paper. 25 more vanished candies ahead. Stay with me. Seafoam was Divinity's forgotten cousin, made with brown sugar instead of white. Grandmother called it seafoam because the candy foamed up like ocean waves when the vinegar hit the hot syrup. Brown sugar, corn syrup, water, and a splash of vinegar boiled together in a heavy pot. She watched it carefully. The mixture turned dark amber and smelled like molasses. At hardball stage, she tested it by dropping syrup into cold water. When it formed a firm ball, she knew it was ready. 2 egg whites beaten stiff in a separate bowl waited. The hot syrup poured slowly into the whites while she beat constantly with a wooden spoon. The mixture foamed and expanded. Her arm moved in circles for 30 minutes without stopping. The candy turned pale tan and fluffy. When it held stiff peaks, she folded in chopped walnuts. Spoonfuls dropped onto wax paper. The candies set overnight and turned crispy on the outside while staying chewy inside. They tasted like brown sugar and vinegar and something nobody could quite name. Seafoam disappeared before Divinity because fewer people knew how to make it right. The recipe required timing most cooks didn't have. Popcorn balls were the candy grandmother made with the children because they could help without ruining the batch. She popped corn in a heavy pot with oil until the kernels exploded and filled the pot. The popped corn went into a large bowl. Any unpopped kernels got picked out by small hands. Sugar, corn syrup, water, and butter boiled together on the stove. She stirred and watched the thermometer climb. At hardball stage, she tested it by dropping syrup into cold water. When the ball held firm without flattening, she poured the hot syrup over the popped corn. She worked fast with a wooden spoon to coat every kernel. Butter on her hands kept the mixture from sticking. While the syrup was still warm, she shaped the coated popcorn into balls. The children helped with buttered hands. Some balls came out perfect and round. Others came out lumpy and misshapen. Nobody cared. The popcorn balls cooled on wax paper. Once set, they wrapped individually in wax paper squares. They lasted weeks in a tin. The candy was sweet and crunchy and stuck in teeth. Children loved them anyway. Popcorn balls disappeared because nobody wanted to deal with sticky hands anymore. Chocolate-covered cherries took 2 full days to make from start to finish. Grandmother started by draining maraschino cherries and letting them dry on paper towels overnight. The next day she made fondant from scratch. Powdered sugar, butter, sweetened condensed milk, and vanilla mixed together until smooth. She pinched off small pieces and flattened them in her palm. 1 cherry went in the center. The fondant wrapped around it completely. The wrapped cherries sat on wax paper for hours while the fondant set. Then came the chocolate. She melted chocolate chips with a little paraffin wax to keep the coating shiny. Each fondant wrapped cherry dipped into the melted chocolate using a fork. Excess chocolate dripped back into the pot. The coated cherries went onto clean wax paper to set. This part took patience and steady hands. Any crack in the chocolate let the cherry juice leak out. Perfect ones stayed sealed. After 24 hours, the magic happened. The cherry juice broke down the fondant inside and turned it into sweet liquid. When someone bit into the chocolate shell, the liquid center burst onto the tongue. These candies took time. Nobody has any more. 2 full days for 1 batch. The recipe left when grandmother did. Peanut butter fudge was the candy grandmother made when cocoa ran low and peanut butter sat full in the pantry. Sugar, milk, and butter heated together in a heavy saucepan. She stirred constantly to keep the mixture from scorching on the bottom. At soft ball stage, she tested it by dropping candy into cold water. When it formed a soft ball between her fingers, she removed it from heat. Peanut butter went in next. A full cup. She stirred until it melted completely and mixed smooth. Then came the beating. She stirred the fudge with a wooden spoon until it lost its shine and started to thicken. Her arm ached after 10 minutes. The fudge turned from glossy to matte. When it held shape, she poured it into a buttered pan. The top smoothed with the back of the spoon. It set overnight in the pantry. By morning, it cut into perfect squares. The fudge was rich and creamy and tasted like peanut butter and sugar. It was sweeter than chocolate fudge. Heavier. More filling. 1 piece satisfied where chocolate fudge needed 2. Grandmother made it less often than chocolate, but the batches disappeared just as fast. Nobody complained when peanut butter replaced cocoa. Coconut bonbons were the candy grandmother made when she wanted something that looked fancy without fancy ingredients. Sweetened condensed milk, powdered sugar, butter, and shredded coconut mixed together in a bowl until it formed a thick paste. She rolled small portions between her palms into perfect balls. This part took time. Each ball had to be smooth and round. The coconut balls sat on wax paper in the refrigerator for an hour to firm up. Then came the chocolate coating. She melted chocolate chips with a little paraffin wax in a double boiler. Each cold coconut ball dipped into the warm chocolate using a toothpick. Excess chocolate dripped back into the pot. The coated bonbons went onto clean wax paper to set. Some got a drizzle of white chocolate on top for decoration. The finished candies looked like something from a candy shop. White coconut inside. Dark chocolate outside. They tasted sweet and rich and tropical. Each bite was different. Some had more coconut. Some had thicker chocolate shells. Grandmother made dozens every year because they kept well in the refrigerator for weeks. These were the candies she gave as gifts. Nobody knew how simple they were to make until she showed them. 10 candies down. 20 more forgotten recipes ahead. Seafoam beaten with brown sugar. Popcorn balls shaped with buttered hands. Chocolate-covered cherries that took 2 days. Peanut butter fudge when cocoa ran low. Coconut bonbons rolled by hand. Keep watching. The rarest candies are coming next. English toffee was the candy grandmother saved for special occasions because it required perfect timing and expensive ingredients. She started with a pound of real butter in her heavy copper pot. No margarine, no shortcuts. The butter melted slow over medium heat. Sugar went in next. She stirred constantly while the mixture bubbled and darkened from pale yellow to deep amber. The smell filled the kitchen, sweet and nutty and almost burnt. A candy thermometer clipped to the side of the pot. She watched it climb degree by degree. At 290 degrees, she added chopped almonds. The nuts toasted in the hot candy. She kept stirring without stopping. Her wrist ached, but she didn't pause. At 300 degrees, she pulled the pot from heat immediately. Any longer, and the toffee burned. She poured it onto a buttered baking sheet in one smooth motion. The candy spread thin and crackled as it cooled. While it was still warm, she scored lines across the surface with a knife. This made breaking it easier later. Melted chocolate went on top once the toffee cooled enough not to melt it completely. She spread the chocolate smooth with an offset spatula. More chopped almonds pressed into the soft chocolate. The toffee set for hours, sometimes overnight. When fully hardened, she broke it along the scored lines into irregular pieces. Each piece snapped clean. The toffee was buttery and crunchy. The chocolate added richness. The almonds added texture. It tasted expensive. It was. A pound of butter, a pound of sugar, good chocolate, fresh almonds. Grandmother only made it twice a year because the ingredients cost too much. She wrapped individual pieces in wax paper and stored them in a tin. They lasted weeks without losing their snap. English toffee disappeared because butter got expensive and nobody wanted to stand at the stove stirring for 40 minutes straight. Butterscotch candy was the hard candy grandmother made when she wanted something simple that didn't require beating or folding or timing miracles. Real butterscotch used brown sugar and real butter. Nothing else tasted right. She melted butter in a heavy saucepan first. The butter foamed and turned golden. Brown sugar went in next along with a splash of water and corn syrup. She stirred until the sugar dissolved completely. The mixture heated slowly. Bubbles formed and popped. The candy turned darker as it cooked, from tan to amber to deep brown. She didn't need a thermometer for this one. Years of practice taught her to recognize the right color and smell. When the candy reached 300 degrees, it smelled like caramel and burnt sugar, but not quite burnt. Just at the edge. She tested it by dropping a small amount into ice water. When it hardened immediately and cracked between her teeth, she knew it was done. The pot came off the heat fast. She poured the molten candy onto a buttered marble slab in a thin stream. It spread and cooled within minutes. While still slightly warm, she scored it with a knife into squares. Once completely cool, she broke it along the lines. Each piece was clear and amber-colored. Light passed through it like stained glass. The candy was hard and sweet with a deep butter flavor that coated the tongue. It lasted for weeks in a tin without getting sticky. Grandmother made it in batches and kept it in glass jars on the counter. Children took pieces without asking. She pretended not to notice. Butterscotch candy disappeared because nobody makes hard candy at home anymore. Buying it became easier, cheaper, faster. The homemade kind tasted better but required patience and a marble slab and the willingness to work with molten sugar that burned skin on contact. Date nut roll was the candy that confused people who'd never seen it before because it looked like salami wrapped in wax paper. Grandmother made it with chopped dates, sugar, butter, and pecans. The dates had to be pitted first. She sat at the kitchen table with a paring knife and split each date to remove the pit. This took an hour for a pound of dates. Once pitted, she chopped them rough. Sugar, butter, and a splash of milk heated together in a saucepan. The mixture bubbled thick. She added the chopped dates and stirred until they melted into the hot sugar. The candy cooked until it pulled away from the sides of the pan. This part required constant stirring. The dates stuck and burned easily. When the mixture was ready, she pulled it from heat and let it cool just enough to handle. Chopped pecans went into a shallow dish. She dumped the warm date mixture onto wax paper and shaped it into a log with buttered hands. The pecans pressed into the outside while the log was still sticky. She rolled it back and forth until pecans covered every inch. The log wrapped tight in fresh wax paper and went into the refrigerator overnight. By morning it was firm enough to slice. She unwrapped it and cut thin rounds with a sharp knife. Each slice showed a dark brown center studded with date pieces surrounded by a ring of pecans. It looked fancy. It tasted like dates and brown sugar and nuts. The candy was dense and chewy and rich. One slice satisfied. 2 slices felt like too much. Grandmother made it once a year because dates were expensive and pitting them took forever. She sliced it only when company came. Date nut roll disappeared because nobody wants to pit a pound of dates by hand anymore. Opera fudge was the white fudge nobody remembered the name of, but everyone recognized by the candied cherries on top. Grandmother made it with white sugar instead of brown. No chocolate. No cocoa. Just sugar, cream, butter, and corn syrup heated together in her heaviest pot. The mixture cooked slowly while she stirred. At 236 degrees, she tested it by dropping a bit into cold water. When it formed a ball that held shape, she removed it from heat. She didn't beat it right away like chocolate fudge. Opera fudge needed to cool first. She let it sit undisturbed until the pot was warm but not hot to touch. Then came the beating. She stirred with a wooden spoon in steady circles. The fudge changed from thin and glossy to thick and creamy. It took 20 minutes of constant stirring. When it started to lose its shine and hold shape, she added vanilla extract and chopped candied cherries. Red and green, the colors of the season. She poured it into a buttered pan before it set up in the pot. The top smoothed with the back of the spoon. More candied cherries pressed into the surface in a pattern. Red, green, red, green. It looked festive. It set overnight. By morning, the fudge cut into neat squares. Each piece had at least 1 cherry on top. Opera fudge tasted different from chocolate fudge, lighter, sweeter. The cherries added bursts of flavor and color. The texture was grainy and smooth at the same time. It melted slowly on the tongue. Grandmother made it because it looked elegant on candy plates next to chocolate fudge and peanut butter fudge. 3 kinds of fudge. 3 different colors. Opera fudge disappeared because candied cherries fell out of fashion and white fudge seemed plain compared to chocolate. The recipe left with the women who knew why it was called opera fudge in the first place. Molasses taffy was the candy that required 2 people to make because 1 person couldn't pull it alone. Grandmother started with molasses, sugar, butter, and vinegar in a heavy pot. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred. The molasses bubbled thick and dark. The smell was strong, sweet, and slightly bitter at the same time. She cooked it until it reached 270 degrees. Higher than fudge. Lower than brittle. When she dropped a thread into ice water, it separated into hard threads. That meant it was ready. She poured the hot taffy onto a buttered marble slab and let it cool just enough to handle. Butter on her hands kept it from sticking. When it was cool enough to touch, she picked up the mass and started pulling. The taffy stretched long, then folded back on itself. Over and over. Pull and fold. Pull and fold. After a few minutes, she needed help. Grandfather came to the kitchen and they pulled together. Each held one end and walked backwards until the taffy stretched thin. Then they brought it back together and pulled again. The taffy changed color as air got worked into it, from dark brown to tan to almost golden. It took 30 minutes of constant pulling. Their arms ached. When the taffy held its shape and didn't sag, she knew it was done. She twisted it into a long rope and cut it into bite-sized pieces with kitchen scissors, each piece wrapped individually in wax paper so they wouldn't stick together. Molasses taffy was chewy and stuck in teeth. It tasted like molasses and butter and effort. Children loved it anyway. Molasses taffy disappeared because nobody has time to pull candy for 30 minutes anymore. Nobody has someone to help them pull. The candy required 2 people and patience. Both became rare. 15 candies revealed, 15 more hidden ahead. English toffee stirred for 40 minutes. Butterscotch poured onto cold marble. date nut roll wrapped like salami. Opera fudge studded with candied cherries. Molasses taffy pulled by two people. If these names sound familiar, you're part of the last generation that remembers. Keep watching. Saltwater taffy got its name from the coast, but grandmother made it 100 miles inland without ever seeing the ocean. She started with sugar, corn syrup, butter, water, and a pinch of salt in a heavy saucepan. The mixture heated while she stirred constantly. At 260 degrees, she tested it by dropping a thread into cold water. When it formed firm threads, she pulled it from heat. Food coloring and flavoring went in last. She made different batches in different colors. Pink for strawberry, yellow for lemon, green for lime, white for vanilla. The hot taffy poured onto a buttered marble slab. It cooled just enough to handle. Butter on her hands kept it from sticking to her skin. She gathered the taffy into a ball and started pulling. The motion was the same as molasses taffy, but the texture was different. Lighter, stretchier, easier to work with. She pulled it alone without help. The taffy stretched thin, then folded back on itself. Pull and fold. Pull and fold. Air worked into it with every pull. The color lightened as it filled with tiny air bubbles. After 20 minutes of pulling, the taffy turned silky and held its shape. She twisted it into a long rope about an inch thick. Kitchen scissors cut it into small rectangles, each piece wrapped in wax paper immediately before it stuck to the next piece. The finished taffy was soft and chewy. It stretched when bitten, stuck to teeth, tasted like whatever flavor she added. Grandmother made multiple flavors and mixed them in a glass jar. Pulling one out was a surprise every time. Saltwater taffy disappeared because pulling it for 20 minutes exhausted arms, and nobody wanted to wrap 200 tiny pieces individually anymore. Easier to buy it already made. Maple creams were the soft candy that tasted like pure maple syrup in solid form. Grandmother made them with real maple syrup, not pancake syrup, real syrup from trees. It cost more, but nothing else tasted right. She heated maple syrup, heavy cream, and butter together in a saucepan. The mixture cooked slowly while she watched. At 234 degrees, she tested it by dropping syrup into cold water. When it formed a very soft ball that barely held together, she knew it was ready. She let it cool completely without stirring. This part took patience, hours sometimes. When the pot was cool to touch, she beat it with a wooden spoon. The candy transformed slowly. Thin became thick. Runny became creamy. It took 15 minutes of steady beating. When it turned pale and started to stiffen, she worked faster. She dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper before it hardened completely. The candies set within minutes. They were soft and creamy, lighter in color than the maple syrup she started with. Almost tan instead of brown. Each piece melted on the tongue. The maple flavor was strong but not overwhelming, sweet but not cloying. Some batches she pressed a walnut half into the top of each cream while they were still soft. The nut added crunch to the creamy candy. Maple creams needed to be stored carefully. They dried out if left uncovered, got sticky if stored somewhere warm. Grandmother kept them in a tin lined with wax paper in the coolest part of the pantry. They lasted weeks if nobody found them. Most times they disappeared within days. Maple creams vanished because real maple syrup became expensive, and imitation syrup didn't taste the same. The candy required pure syrup and the patience to wait hours for it to cool before beating. Both became luxuries nobody could afford. Coconut haystacks were the no-cook candy grandmother made when the kitchen was too hot for boiling sugar or when she needed something fast. She melted butterscotch chips in a double boiler over simmering water. The chips melted slowly while she stirred. When smooth and completely melted, she removed them from heat. Shredded sweetened coconut went in next, a whole bag. She stirred until every shred of coconut was coated in melted butterscotch. The mixture was thick and sticky. She dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper in rough mounds. Each one looked like a little haystack, shaggy and uneven. No two were alike. They set at room temperature within an hour. The butterscotch hardened around the coconut. Each haystack was crunchy and chewy at the same time. The butterscotch added sweetness. The coconut added texture. They tasted tropical and rich. Some years she made them with chocolate chips instead of butterscotch. Dark chocolate haystacks looked different but tasted just as good. Other years she added chopped peanuts to the mixture for extra crunch. Coconut haystacks were the candy she let children make because they couldn't mess it up. No thermometers, no beating, no timing, just melting and stirring and dropping. Even young children could help. They loved shaping the mounds and watching them harden. Grandmother made them year-round because they required no special occasion. Just a bag of chips and a bag of coconut. The ingredients stayed cheap. The process stayed simple. Coconut haystacks disappeared not because they were difficult, but because they weren't impressive enough. They looked homemade in a way that seemed unsophisticated. Store-bought candies came in perfect shapes with perfect coatings. Haystacks looked messy by comparison. They stopped appearing on candy plates. The recipe stayed in drawers. Eventually it was forgotten along with dozens of other simple candies that seemed too plain to bother with anymore. Candied orange peel was the candy grandmother made from scraps nobody else wanted. After juicing oranges for breakfast, she saved the peels instead of throwing them away. The peels soaked in cold water overnight to remove some of the bitterness. The next day she drained them and cut them into thin strips with a sharp knife, 1/4 inch wide, 2 inches long. Uniform strips cooked evenly. The strips went into a pot of boiling water for 10 minutes. She drained them and repeated this process 2 more times. 3 rounds of boiling to remove the bitter oils. After the final boil, the peels were soft and pliable. Sugar and water made a simple syrup in a clean pot. The orange peels went into the syrup. She cooked them slowly over low heat for an hour. The peels turned translucent. They absorbed the syrup and became soft and sweet. When most of the syrup had been absorbed, she removed them from heat. Each strip lifted out with a fork and rolled in granulated sugar while still warm. The sugar stuck to the sticky peels and coated them completely. They dried on a wire rack overnight. By morning, the candied peels were firm and covered in a crust of sugar crystals. They tasted intensely of orange, sweet, and slightly bitter at the same time. The texture was chewy with a sugary crunch on the outside. Grandmother stored them in a glass jar. They lasted months without spoiling. She served them alongside other candies or dipped them halfway in melted dark chocolate for something more elegant. Candied orange peel disappeared because it required time and patience to make something from garbage. 3 rounds of boiling, an hour of simmering, overnight drying, all that work for candy made from trash. Younger generations didn't see the value. They threw away the peels and bought candy at stores instead. Caramels wrapped in wax paper were the candy grandmother made in bulk because they kept for months and traveled well. She started with sugar, butter, heavy cream, corn syrup, and a pinch of salt in her largest pot. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred with a wooden spoon. Caramels required constant attention. They scorched easily. Burned sugar ruined the whole batch. She stood at the stove for 45 minutes stirring without stopping. The mixture bubbled thick and turned from pale tan to deep amber. At 245 degrees, she tested it by dropping a small amount into cold water. When it formed a firm ball that held its shape but remained pliable, she knew it was done. Vanilla extract went in at the very end. She poured the hot caramel into a buttered pan and let it cool completely. This took hours, sometimes overnight. When fully set, she turned the whole sheet of caramel out onto a cutting board. A sharp knife cut it into small rectangles. Each piece wrapped individually in a square of wax paper. The ends twisted to seal. This part took forever. Dozens of tiny caramels, dozens of little wax paper wrappers. Her fingers moved fast after the first few dozen. Muscle memory took over. The finished caramels were soft and buttery. They stuck to teeth and melted slowly on the tongue. The salt balanced the sweetness perfectly. Grandmother made them by the hundreds. She filled jars and tins and gave them as gifts. They lasted months at room temperature without getting hard or sticky. Caramels disappeared because wrapping each one individually drove people insane. 2 hours of stirring at the stove, 6 hours of cooling, 2 more hours of cutting and wrapping. 400 pieces later, most people decided buying caramels was smarter than making them. The homemade ones tasted better, but nobody had 10 hours to spare anymore. 20 candies down. 10 more lost recipes ahead. Saltwater taffy pulled for 20 minutes. Maple creams beaten until thick. Coconut haystacks dropped onto wax paper. Candied orange peel boiled 3 times. Caramels wrapped one by one. The final 10 are the rarest of all. Stay with me until the end. Sugared walnuts were the candy grandmother made when walnut trees dropped their harvest and she had more nuts than she knew what to do with. She cracked the walnuts by hand with a metal nutcracker. Each shell split open to reveal the meat inside. She picked out the walnut halves carefully to keep them whole. Broken pieces went into baking. Perfect halves became candy. Sugar, water, cinnamon, and a pinch of salt heated together in a heavy skillet. She stirred until the sugar dissolved completely. The mixture bubbled and turned into a thick syrup. Walnut halves went in next. She stirred constantly while the nuts toasted in the hot syrup. The sugar coated each piece. As the water evaporated, the sugar began to crystallize. The coating turned from glossy to matte. She kept stirring until every walnut was covered in a crust of cinnamon sugar. The nuts dumped onto a buttered baking sheet. She worked fast with 2 forks to separate them before they cooled into one giant clump. The walnuts cooled quickly. Within minutes they were ready. Each piece was crunchy and sweet. The cinnamon added warmth. The walnuts added richness. They tasted like fall and wood smoke, even though no smoke touched them. Grandmother made them in huge batches. Jars and jars of sugared walnuts lined the pantry shelves. She served them with coffee when neighbors visited. Packed them in small bags as gifts. Put them on salads when she wanted something fancy. They lasted months in sealed jars without getting stale. Sugared walnuts disappeared because cracking walnuts by hand took hours and grocery stores sold them already shelled. The magic of turning fresh nuts into candy faded. Buying them pre-made became easier. Cheaper. Faster. The recipe stayed simple, but the willingness to crack 2 pounds of walnuts by hand disappeared with the women who remembered when walnuts were free if you picked them yourself. Vanilla fondant was the candy base grandmother used for dozens of other candies but rarely ate plain. She made it with sugar, corn syrup, water, and cream of tartar in a heavy saucepan. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred. At 238 degrees, she tested it by dropping syrup into cold water. When it formed a soft ball, she poured it onto a buttered marble slab without stirring. This part required restraint. Every instinct said to stir, but stirring made the fondant grainy. She let it cool undisturbed until the marble was warm but not hot to touch. Then she worked it with a metal scraper. She pushed the fondant from the edges toward the center, folded it over itself. Pushed and folded. Pushed and folded. The fondant changed texture. From clear and glossy to white and opaque. It took 20 minutes of constant working. When it turned completely white and started to stiffen, she added vanilla extract and kneaded it like bread dough. The fondant became smooth and pliable. She wrapped it tight in plastic and let it rest overnight. By morning, it was ready to use. She pinched off pieces to wrap around cherries for chocolate-covered cherries. Rolled it thin to cut into mints. Mixed it with peanut butter for filling. Added food coloring to make pastel candies. Fondant was the foundation. The base. The blank canvas. Plain fondant tasted sweet and creamy, but boring. Nobody ate it alone. It needed chocolate or fruit or nuts to become interesting. Grandmother always kept a batch in the refrigerator wrapped tight. It lasted weeks, ready whenever she needed it. Vanilla fondant disappeared because making it from scratch took skill and patience. Store-bought fondant came in tubs, pre-made, ready to use. It didn't taste as good, but nobody seemed to care. The art of making fondant left with the women who understood that some things required time and a marble slab. Horehound candy was the medicinal candy grandmother made when someone had a cough and she didn't trust drugstore remedies. She started with dried horehound herb ordered from the pharmacy or picked from the garden if it grew wild nearby. The herb looked like nothing special. Gray-green leaves, fuzzy texture, bitter smell. She boiled the leaves in water for 30 minutes to make a strong tea. The kitchen smelled like medicine and earth. When the tea was dark and concentrated, she strained out the leaves and measured the liquid. Sugar went into the horehound tea along with corn syrup and a squeeze of lemon. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred. At 300 degrees, she tested it by dropping a thread into ice water. When it cracked hard, she knew it was done. She poured the molten candy onto a buttered marble slab in a thin sheet. It cooled fast. While still slightly warm, she scored it with a knife into small squares. Once completely cool, she broke it along the lines. Each piece was dark amber, almost brown, hard as glass. It tasted bitter and sweet at the same time. The horehound flavor was strong, medicinal. Not pleasant, but not terrible either. Children hated it. Adults tolerated it because it soothed sore throats and stopped coughs better than anything else. Grandmother wrapped individual pieces in wax paper and kept them in a tin. She handed them out when someone complained of a scratchy throat. One piece dissolved slowly in the mouth. The bitterness coated the throat. The cough stopped. Horehound candy disappeared because medicine improved and nobody wanted to taste bitter herbs when cherry-flavored cough drops existed. The candy worked, but it didn't taste good. Convenience and flavor won. The herb became obscure. The candy became forgotten. Only the oldest people remembered what horehound candy tasted like and why their grandmothers made it every winter without fail. Coconut ice was the two-toned candy that looked pink and white like a sunset but tasted like pure coconut and sugar. Grandmother made it with sweetened condensed milk, powdered sugar, shredded coconut, and vanilla extract mixed together in a large bowl. She stirred until it formed a thick paste that barely held together. The mixture divided in half. One half stayed white. The other half got a few drops of red food coloring mixed in until it turned pale pink. She pressed the white mixture into a buttered pan first. Her hand smoothed it flat and even. The pink mixture went on top. She pressed it down firmly so the two layers stuck together. The pan went into the refrigerator overnight. By morning, the coconut ice was firm enough to cut. She turned it out onto a cutting board and sliced it into small squares with a sharp knife. Each piece showed two distinct layers, pink on top, white on bottom. The line between them was clean and straight. Coconut ice was sweet and dense. It didn't melt, didn't crumble, just compressed coconut and sugar that dissolved slowly on the tongue. The texture was grainy and smooth at the same time. Some people loved it. Others found it too sweet, too dense, too much. Grandmother made it because it required no cooking, no thermometers, no candy stages, just mixing and pressing and waiting. Children could help without burning themselves. The candy kept for weeks at room temperature without going bad. It traveled well. She packed it in tins for neighbors and relatives. Coconut ice disappeared because it seemed old-fashioned, too simple, too plain. Modern candies had layers of chocolate and caramel and nuts. Coconut ice had two colors and one flavor. It couldn't compete. The recipe stayed in old cookbooks, but nobody made it anymore. The pink and white layers faded into memory. Vinegar candy was the hard candy that tasted nothing like vinegar despite its name and confused everyone who tried it for the first time. Grandmother made it with sugar, corn syrup, water, butter, and a tablespoon of white vinegar in a heavy saucepan. The vinegar smell filled the kitchen while it cooked, sharp and sour. Children made faces and complained. She ignored them. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred. At 300 degrees, she tested it by dropping a thread into ice water. When it cracked hard and brittle, she pulled it from heat. The vinegar smell disappeared as the candy cooled. She poured it onto a buttered marble slab in a thin puddle. It spread and cooled quickly. While still warm enough to handle, she pulled off a piece and started stretching it. The candy pulled long and folded back on itself. Pull and fold. Pull and fold. Air worked into it with every stretch. The color changed from dark amber to pale gold, almost white. After 10 minutes of pulling, the candy turned opaque and satiny. She twisted it into a rope and cut it into small pillows with kitchen scissors. Each piece wrapped in wax paper before it stuck to the next. Vinegar candy tasted sweet with a slight tang that came from nowhere you could identify. Not sour, not bitter, just bright. Clean. Different. The texture was hard but melted on the tongue faster than other hard candies. Grandmother made it in small batches because pulling it exhausted her arms. She gave pieces to children as treats. They always asked what flavor it was. She always said vinegar. They never believed her. Vinegar candy disappeared because explaining it was too difficult. Nobody understood why vinegar made sweet candy taste better. The chemistry didn't matter. The confusion did. Easier to make flavors people recognized than defend a candy that tasted like nothing anyone could name. 25 candies revealed, 5 more secrets left. Sugared walnuts cracked by hand. Vanilla fondant worked on cold marble. Horehound candy that stopped coughs. Coconut ice pressed into pink and white layers. Vinegar candy that tasted like nothing anyone could name. The final 5 are the rarest. Candied pecans were the candy grandmother made when pecan trees dropped their harvest and the house smelled like fall and wood smoke. She cracked the pecans by hand with a heavy nutcracker. Each shell split to reveal the nut inside. She picked out whole pecan halves and saved the broken pieces for pies and cookies. Only perfect halves became candy. An egg white went into a mixing bowl. She beat it with a fork until it foamed but didn't form peaks. Just loose and frothy. The pecan halves went into the egg white and stirred until every piece was coated. Brown sugar, white sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of salt mixed together in a separate bowl. The wet pecans dumped into the sugar mixture. She stirred with her hands until every nut was covered completely. The coated pecans spread onto a buttered baking sheet in a single layer. They baked at 300 degrees for 30 minutes. Every 10 minutes, she stirred them to keep them from sticking together. The sugar melted and caramelized around the nuts. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter. When the timer rang, she pulled them out and stirred them immediately to separate any that had stuck together. They cooled on the pan. Within an hour, they were ready. Each pecan was crunchy and sweet. The cinnamon added warmth. The caramelized sugar added depth. They tasted better than any candied nuts from stores. Grandmother made them by the pound. She filled jars and gave them as gifts. Served them at gatherings, put them on salads when she wanted to impress someone. Candied pecans lasted weeks in sealed containers without losing their crunch. They disappeared, not because they were difficult, but because cracking pecans by hand took hours and bought them pre-made became easier. The connection between tree and table was severed. The candy lost its meaning when the work disappeared. Potato candy was the candy nobody believed was made with real potatoes until they watched grandmother make it. She started with one small potato boiled until soft. The potato mashed smooth with a fork. No lumps, no chunks, just silky mashed potato. While still warm, she added powdered sugar 1 cup at a time. She stirred after each addition. The mixture transformed from wet and sticky to dry and pliable. It took 3 or 4 cups of sugar before it formed a dough that could be rolled. The dough rolled out on a clean counter dusted with more powdered sugar. She rolled it thin, about a 1/4 inch thick. Peanut butter spread across the entire surface in an even layer, not too thick or it would ooze out when rolled. The dough rolled up tight like a jelly roll starting from one long edge. She rolled it carefully to keep it even. When fully rolled, she wrapped it tight in plastic wrap and refrigerated it for an hour. Once cold, she unwrapped it and sliced it into rounds with a sharp knife. Each slice showed a spiral of white dough and brown peanut butter. It looked like a pinwheel. Potato candy tasted sweet and creamy with a strong peanut butter flavor. Nobody could taste the potato. It disappeared completely. The potato was just a base, a way to hold sugar together without eggs or butter. Each piece was soft and rich, almost too sweet. One piece satisfied. 2 pieces felt like too much. Grandmother made it during hard times when eggs and butter cost too much, but potatoes stayed cheap. She made it during good times because people were fascinated by candy made from potatoes. Potato candy disappeared because explaining it was exhausting. People didn't believe potatoes made candy. They didn't want to try it. The strangeness overshadowed the taste. Eventually, nobody made it anymore, and the recipe vanished into old notebooks nobody opened. Church windows candy was the no-bake candy that looked like stained glass when sliced and made children believe grandmother was magic. She started by melting a package of chocolate chips with butter in a saucepan over low heat. The chocolate melted smooth and glossy. She removed it from heat and let it cool slightly. A bag of colored mini marshmallows went in next. She stirred gently until every marshmallow was coated in chocolate, but none melted. The marshmallows stayed whole and puffy. The mixture dumped onto a sheet of wax paper. She shaped it into a log with buttered hands. The log rolled tight and wrapped in fresh wax paper. It went into the refrigerator overnight. By morning, it was firm enough to slice. She unwrapped it carefully and cut thin rounds with a sharp knife. Each slice looked like a stained glass window. Dark chocolate background with colorful marshmallow pieces scattered throughout like bits of colored glass. Pink, yellow, green, white. The colors glowed against the dark chocolate. Children thought it was the most beautiful candy they'd ever seen. The name made sense. Church windows, stained glass, light coming through colored glass. Church windows candy tasted like chocolate and marshmallow. Simple, sweet, nothing fancy. But it looked impressive. Grandmother made it because it required no cooking, no candy thermometer, no precise timing, just melting and stirring and shaping. Children could help without burning themselves. The candy kept for weeks in the refrigerator. She sliced it fresh whenever company came. It always surprised people, always impressed them. Church windows candy disappeared because it seemed too simple, too easy. Not impressive enough once everyone knew the secret. Melted chocolate and marshmallows didn't sound special even though it looked beautiful. The visual magic faded when the method became common knowledge. Eventually, people stopped making it, and the stained glass windows went dark. Cinnamon hard candy was the red candy that burned tongues and cleared sinuses and tasted like fire in solid form. Grandmother made it with sugar, corn syrup, water, and cinnamon oil in a heavy saucepan. Not cinnamon extract, cinnamon oil. The real thing. Concentrated and intense. A few drops went a long way. The mixture heated slowly while she stirred. At 300 degrees, she tested it by dropping a thread into ice water. When it cracked hard and brittle, she pulled it from heat. Red food coloring went in first, just enough to turn the candy bright red. Then came the cinnamon oil. 3 drops, maybe 4. The smell hit immediately, sharp and spicy and overwhelming. She stirred fast and poured it onto a buttered marble slab before the smell drove her out of the kitchen. The candy spread thin and cooled quickly. While still warm, she scored it with a knife into small squares. Once completely cool, she broke it along the lines. Each piece was clear red like glass. Light passed through it. Cinnamon hard candy was not gentle. It burned. The cinnamon oil was too strong for children, too strong for most adults. One piece made eyes water, made noses run, cleared congestion instantly. Grandmother made it for people with head colds. One piece sucked slowly opened airways better than any medicine. It tasted like Christmas and fire and red hots multiplied by 10. She wrapped individual pieces in wax paper and kept them in a tin marked with a warning. Small pieces only. Not for children. Cinnamon hard candy disappeared because the intensity scared people away. Modern candies were mild, polite, easy. Nobody wanted their mouth to burn. Nobody wanted to cry from candy. The recipe stayed in old notebooks, but the cinnamon oil became hard to find. The candy that cleared sinuses and burned tongues faded into memory. Vanilla bourbon balls were the adult candy grandmother made without bourbon because alcohol never entered her kitchen. She used vanilla extract instead, and nobody complained. The candy started with vanilla wafer cookies crushed into fine crumbs. She put them in a bag and rolled them with a rolling pin until no large pieces remained. Just powder. The crumbs went into a mixing bowl. Powdered sugar, cocoa powder, and finely chopped pecans mixed in next. Corn syrup and vanilla extract added liquid. She stirred everything together until it formed a dough that held together when squeezed. The dough was sticky and dark, almost black from the cocoa. She pinched off small portions and rolled them between her palms into perfect spheres, each ball about an inch across. This part took time, rolling dozens of little balls. Her hands got messy. The chocolate mixture stuck to her fingers. She had to wash them every 10 balls or the coating wouldn't stick properly. When all the balls were formed, they rolled in more powdered sugar to coat the outside. Some she rolled in cocoa powder instead. Some in finely chopped pecans. Different coatings for variety. The powdered sugar ones looked elegant, white dusted spheres. The cocoa ones looked rich and dark. The pecan ones looked rustic. Each coating changed the flavor slightly. The bourbon balls needed time to set. She stored them in a tin with wax paper between layers and let them sit for at least 3 days. The flavors melded together during that time. The texture changed, became firmer, richer. The cookie crumbs softened. The corn syrup soaked in. After 3 days they were ready. Vanilla bourbon balls without the bourbon tasted like chocolate and vanilla and pecans. Rich and dense. 1 piece satisfied. 2 pieces felt like too much. They were the candy she made for adults. Not because they contained alcohol, but because children found them too intense. Too rich, not sweet enough. Adults appreciated them. The complexity, the depth, the way the flavors developed over days. Grandmother made them in batches and gave them as gifts during the winter months. They lasted weeks in sealed tins without drying out or going stale. Perfect for gift-giving. Vanilla bourbon balls disappeared when the name confused people. Bourbon balls without bourbon didn't make sense. Explaining it was tedious. People expected alcohol. When they learned there was none, they felt deceived or disappointed. The name became a problem. Eventually, she stopped making them. The recipe stayed in a drawer. The candy faded away. Nobody makes them anymore. 30 Candies grandmother made in silence while the house slept. Nobody knew how many hours she spent or how tired her hands became. Nobody saw the burns on her fingers from hot sugar or the ache in her wrists from beating egg whites. They only saw the finished candies sitting perfect on china plates. These recipes are vanishing with the last women who remember them. The marble slabs are stored in basements. The candy thermometers are packed in boxes. The copper pots are sold at estate sales. Nobody makes these anymore because nobody has the time. Nobody has the patience. Nobody wants to stand at a stove for an hour stirring sugar or wrap 200 pieces individually in wax paper. But you can. You can make 1 batch. Just 1. Pull out your grandmother's recipe box if you still have it. Find the card written in her handwriting.